Hello, my name is Elizabeth Pendergrass, and welcome to today's webinar, How to Identify Unrealistic Project Expectations and What to Do About Them. I will start by introducing our presenter today, Laura Zuber. Laura Zuber is QSM's Customer Support Manager and Lead Trainer. She has 25 years of experience in software development consulting, training, and support. She has conducted training and coaching sessions for all of QSM's Slim Suite tools and helped customers implement Slim across a wide variety of processes and platforms. Laura has managed software development projects, served as a senior software process improvement specialist, performed process assessments, designed and implemented best practices, and authored numerous training programs. She is a certified Scrum Master and lead consultant for using Slim with Agile development. Without further ado, I'll let Laura get started.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and I'd like to welcome you all to the webinar and really appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to be with us today. Most of you recognize unrealistic project expectations without much analysis, and you probably have a gut feel for when you and your team is being asked to deliver the impossible. What SLIM does is tell you where and why project goals may be beyond demonstrated capabilities and helps you communicate this to other stakeholders. Software development projects are planned to support business needs, right? Whether for internal use or for customers. Projects have strategic goals, usually concerning time and money. These desired outcomes, once voiced or entered into a portfolio management system, become expectations. But how often are these project expectations based on reality or a true need? Many times people set these expectations, the ones who set them are just simply uninformed. They don't know what's reasonable and what's not. Your job as estimators and planners is to help stakeholders see, literally, the potential risk of unrealistic project expectations and propose alternative solutions. Estimating software is challenging because estimates are typically needed when we know the least. Often, stakeholders want a single point estimate based on hidden assumptions, yet they expect pinpoint accuracy. Having empirical data at your fingertips helps you communicate more effectively and negotiate some achievable plans. Software estimation, and we're talking system or other kind of iterative development work, is often confused with high-level management goals. So releasing a product in time to meet a market window, that may be a project goal, or trying to outbid the competitor and win some business. Maybe starting with some detailed plans and work breakdown structure and doing an estimate that way. These are how we want to make the customer happy, and so we try to meet those goals. But unlike goal-based estimates, we need this project done in 6 months for under $5 million. Capability-based estimation is a technical calculation of what we might be able to do, assuming a given scope, cost, schedule, staff, and uncertainty level. Typically, projects overrun their estimated schedules and budgets for the following reasons. Unrealistic estimates that exceed our capabilities, and that's our focus for today. But also due to not estimating scope. SLIM, and what I'm going to show you, if you're not familiar, is a scope-based top-down estimating approach. So what is the volume of delivered features that we have to worry about? Another reason is the failure to re-estimate when the scope creep does occur. And that happens a lot of times, particularly when the estimate is based on very little information. We finally get some and realize that maybe we didn't ask for everything we needed in the first place. And then lastly, from not understanding the consequences of adding staff in order to reduce schedule. The consequences, unless you're familiar with the dynamics of software projects, often just are, again, one of those places where folks are not informed. So what I want to show you is how empirically based estimation tools like Slim Estimate can reduce the time and effort spent in estimating itself and help you deliver achievable estimates grounded in actual performance data from real projects. I grew up watching that old game show, Let's Make a Deal. Contestants would, guess what's behind door number 1, door number 2, and door number 3. You don't want to guess what's going to happen on your software projects. You want a real robust, repeatable estimation process. So the solution that I'll show you begins with comparing those desired outcomes, those expectations, to known capabilities. And in doing that comparison with some historical data, what we're going to do is be able to identify what assumptions are risky. And then we want to then take our situation and compute some alternative solutions. If this is risky, then what can we achieve? And when we compute some alternative solutions, and that's one thing the Slim is easy and quick to do, then that lets us assess the relative risks of each separate estimate calculation, if you will. And then lastly, once we come up with what we would call our recommended solution, then we can decide how much contingency do we need in order to balance the risk and reward scenario. For those who aren't familiar with SLIM, and SLIM stands for Software Lifecycle Management, we have a suite of tools. SLIM, our methodology, like I said, is scope-based and top-down. QSM's founder, Larry Putnam Sr., did empirical research on completed software projects in order to develop our model based on the software production equation. And it states that we're going to deliver some value to our customers, some scope or size, by applying some amount of effort over some amount of time at a given efficiency or productivity level. Think of, for us, efficiency is a really good way of describing that. And what it does is it models the nonlinear relationships between time and effort that have been validated for over the 40 years of data collection and analysis that we've done at QSM. This is what that trade-off looks like for a project of a given size and efficiency, again, that productivity index. The solid red line is the range of choices you can make about whether time or effort is more important. The dashed line represents variability in those outcomes based on uncertainty. But when you specify, constraints, those things that hold us back from achieving our goals, then you reduce the number of available options for the project. So I'm going to show you how to create solutions that meet one or more constraints, and then how to compare a level of contingency or management reserve that will help you manage the associated risks, the ones that you're willing to take on. Now, projects can be scheduled and staffed in different ways, but for a given project, even within this solution space here, you can choose to take more time. And that not only reduces the staffing and associated costs, but it increases quality. But if you have to, then increase the effort to achieve a schedule or goal. That's okay. But going too far in either direction gets you into what we call the impossible and the impractical zones. And SLIM lets you know where these zones are so that you can stay away from them. SLIM's estimation solution is built around QSM's industry database, primarily containing data on 5 core metrics: size, duration or schedule, effort, productivity, and defects. Statistical trends like those shown here are created for different application types, including industry sectors or development methodologies. They tell you what is typical for the average line anyway, tells you what's typical for projects of a given type and size. The core metrics shown here, well, all of them, scale non-linearly with project size, because this is a straight line, and most of these are log-log plots. So these relationships are robust and, again, have been consistent for over 40 years and consistent across domains. this empirical knowledge about these relationships is built into the estimation approach and all the algorithms, charts, and reports. So the first step in estimating our estimation solutions to identify these unrealistic project expectations and then figure out what to do about them starts with performing a trend, what we call a trend variance analysis. And this lets us see the reasonableness of those estimate assumptions around, let's say, cost and schedule. We can look at them individually and see where the values that are being asked to achieve those goals, where do they sit relative to the statistical trend for like projects. And here we're going to say that average behavior is reasonable or typical. And then so deviations, large deviations from average, either high or low, depending on the metric, will have different implications on our project. Now, the SLIM suite of tools actually provides two types of risk analysis, the risk due to trend variance that you'll see, and we're also going to be dealing with a little bit risk due to uncertainty. That's where we're calculating the probability of potential outcomes, and that's what's going to aid us in determining that contingency amount. So I'm going to show you both, but if you'd like to know more, we do have several videos on the QSM support video tutorials page, and there's a short video that explains both of our risks approach if you're interested in learning more. So trend variance analysis is largely visual, and there are two chart types that help you and other stakeholders see the reasonableness of those expected targets and constraints. The trend chart, like the one I just showed you, we're going to see some more examples, is available. We can use that both in our SLIM Collaborate and SLIM Estimate tools. We also have a fairly new quadrant chart, or otherwise known as a bubble chart. This is available in SLIM Collaborate and SLIM Master Plan, and mostly, targeted at looking at several projects at once, a portfolio. And then to go along with these charts, we need something on the charts. So we need to compute a couple of estimates or use what we call solution methods. One is the feasibility wizard, which would be in SLIM Collaborate. And the identical solution method is the bid evaluation wizard in SLIM Estimate. And then we also want to be able to compare those either to the average of trends. We can go a step further and create actually what we call a balanced risk solution. But either way, these are the basic components of getting started. I'm going to show examples here in the slides, and then I'll be getting to the tool eventually. So this is an example of a trend chart in SLIM Collaborate. The basic chart is the same as you'll see in SLIM Estimate, and I'll show one of those as well. But here we've got some colored regions that have been added to identify risk zones based on how much the estimate deviates from average. I'll show you the definition of these specific risk zones in a moment, but a couple of other features to point out are the little orange diamond would be represented by what we would call your current estimate. This is those desired outcomes, the perhaps unrealistic expectations. And alongside that is the what we call the balanced risk solution. So these are two different solutions, and what we would call industry-based compared to the desired outcomes on the chart. The risk rating arrow that's on that right vertical axis indicates a general, what we would call maybe a general risk tendency. The color and the direction of the arrow change depending on which core metric you're looking at to emphasize where your estimate is sitting relative to, again, what we would consider typical or average. The blue arrow indicates that a value higher is more conservative. In this case, your project indicates a longer duration or schedule than average. Conversely, then a red arrow on the y-axis would indicate that an estimate value on the high side is riskier than average. An example of that would be the productivity index claiming to be more productive than perhaps you've demonstrated in the past. The trend statistical regions have been translated then in Collaborate to these risk zones. A blue shaded region is conservative or moderately conservative. White is around that average trend, so that's what we call typical, and a light red or moderately risky to dark red. Conservative, again, implies risk buffer, taking longer than average, assuming lower productivity than average, or using more people than average, just because it can be risky, so to speak, even though it's on the conservative side. The trend variance risk ratings for each metrics are shown on a risk chart, and that's what you're looking at here with the list of metrics here. We can look at both just the development activities and then the project as a whole. In addition, SLIM Collaborate will provide an overall risk rating for the project itself based on total effort and total duration. And this is just an example of a very similar chart in SLIM Estimate. It displays estimate solutions with the added benefit of being able to display your own historical projects in addition to industry data. That allows you to do a quick visual assessment of how your estimate stacks up against your own history as well. Now, there's no shaded region here for your analysis, but the utility is the same. And you can actually get a report in both tools to see numerically the deviation if that's something that would be helpful for you. Now, here is an estimate for development and test, the little blue dot there, and it's higher than average, but the deviation is less than one standard deviation. So this one is not necessarily unreasonable. The question would be, is it in line with your own history? So we would consider, outside of one plus or minus one standard deviation, approaching those risky areas. This is an example of the quad chart that I mentioned. It's relatively new. It's designed to support trend variance analysis at the portfolio level. The horizontal vertical axes display positive and negative deviations from the average trend line, and those trend lines are relative specific to each project. Now you can select the estimate assumptions or performance metrics for these axes yourself. This one we're looking at schedule on the bottom axis, and we're looking at deviations from average productivity on the y-axis. You can also set this target zone, which is this green area we've set up here as plus or minus, one standard deviation. Again, you could pick how to define yours differently, such that projects outside of this zone are going to fall into one of the risk quadrants, enabling you to focus then on investigating these projects and negotiating commitments. The bubble size you can also set. Here, I think it might be project cost. It could also be the project size or the scope. So notice the larger bubble that's down in the lower right-hand quadrant. One of your bigger projects is proposing to a low productivity, which is going to create a long schedule and maybe tie up all your resources. Well, if it were me, I would try and go figure out why that's what assumptions is this project based on, and we say this in training a lot, that the fact of doing this kind of analysis and doing an estimate like this helps you have a dialogue with everyone, so that a lot of times we find folks just aren't making the right, they're not on the same page regarding the assumptions of the estimate or the project. And so walking through this process is just a great communication tool all by itself. One additional thing is that in SLIM Master Plan, which also contains these charts, the SLIM Control is our tracking and forecasting tool, and you can, once your project's in flight and you're looking at plan versus actuals, then your whole portfolio will be up to date, and so those kinds of projects will appear here as well. Same chart in SLIM Collaborate, and it's found on our portfolio dashboard. You can use the project list over there because we have all of your projects in one place. You can filter on projects by various characteristics, such as a division or a group or a proposed end date, and to analyze that group of projects and focus in on them. So a little bit more flexibility. You can also see projects at different stages within the life cycle, whether they're finished, which is what a closeout project is, their very early estimates, which is what a feasibility is, or perhaps a second estimate once we found out more information. So those are the examples of the charts. And just lastly, let me just repeat what I said about the other, let's see, the items that we need to do the analysis is having run a couple of solutions. We want to enter those desired outcomes, our conceivably unrealistic expectations. And what we're doing here is that production equation that I showed, the 4 variables, if we know what we're supposed to deliver, we have a size, and if we have expectations for, let's say, like the 7 months and using only 8 people or a dollar amount, then what SLIM's actually doing in this case is calculating the productivity that would be required to deliver those expectations. And so we're going to compute that, and then we're going to be able to compare that either just to the trends themselves or go ahead and calculate that balanced risk solution that represents what's typical. Okay, so these are all the building blocks that we'll be looking at. So how do we, now that let's assuming that we've calculated those solutions and we're ready to do our analysis, how do we go about doing that? The number of participants in this webinar tells me that it's safe to assume that you identify unrealistic expectations quite often. So with the sound quantitative method to communicate the challenges in achieving the project's goal, your job's only half done. That's a very good first step, but you want to do more than that. You want to ask a few questions of yourself or people on the project team to guide your analysis of coming up with a viable alternative solution. So you need to understand as best you can the unique challenges of each project or release. Sometimes you're in a position to do that, sometimes you're not. The first assumption here in the steps I'm going to lead you through is that an appropriate, what we would say, trend line has been selected. So I'm not going to go into that in this talk. If you've been using a custom trend from your history, so you can use, industry trends if you don't have your own. A best practice would be to compute your own statistical trends with a few projects. If you've got your own history, then of course you're going to have a better feel for what's reasonable, and you can look at similar projects in your database to see if maybe this higher PI might be defensible. Okay, but assuming that you're not sure of that, or we need to do this analysis a little bit more in-depthly, we're going to assume we need to negotiate on something, right? We're just going to assume that that PI is kind of out of reach for us. The software production equation, because I showed you a very simple form, but if you understand that time gets a lot more bang for the buck, if you will, in this nonlinear trade-off, then the first thing to negotiate for is more time. Is the time constraint a real constraint? So in terms of understanding what to negotiate for, either, course budget or staffing, sometimes none of this can give, but you need to ask. Know what's the hard constraints are. And then also we're not just looking only at core metrics here, but those are the way that other risks of the project show up, right? A change in scope or a change in the direction of the project itself will lend some risk. That's probably going to maybe appear in your size estimate. Is it a new technology? Is this something we've never done before? Then again, you might want to add more scope for that, or consider alternative solutions in the fact that your scope estimate might be risky itself. Quality may be an issue, and staffing. So these are things that you already know. I'm not telling you anything new. It's just make sure you understand where the risks are to the extent that you can. So once you have a feel for your particular estimate's challenges, then you can follow a standard process and compute a range of solutions to expose those unreasonable alternatives. And again, I'm going to show you how to do that. The first step would be to calculate that those solutions that I've mentioned. And since we are dealing with uncertainty explicitly within our tools, you can set a confidence level, if you will, or with using our uncertainty sliders to help the computation of some probable range of outcomes based on the level of uncertainty that you're going to have to deal with using SLIM's Monte Carlo simulation. So once you set that, then what we want to do actually is go ahead and start our analysis by selecting that industry average solution. We're going to see what can we do without having to take on necessarily that higher productivity index. The next step, step 2, would be then to in guiding our analysis of alternative solutions, let's look at each constraint one at a time. So what you're looking at here is a list of the different kinds of what we call single constraint solutions you can do in SLIM Estimate. For example, that 7-month duration. I could say, tell me what it would take to meet 7 months, and that would be the life duration example there. And the blue arrows just show you that these are also things that we can do in SLIM Collaborate. Okay, now just a little tip there is that, and one thing I'm going to do when I get into the tool is I'm going to actually speed up the process a little bit in SLIM Estimate. We can put both of our constraints in and it will save us a lot of time, and I'll show you that. So once we have several alternative solutions, maybe a handful, they may not all be viable, but they're jumping off points for making compromises, maybe some negotiation, and we can, at least the ones that SLIM helps us come up with may not be perfect, but again, we can go and do some more tweaking and get somewhere in the middle, something we think we can live with that will balance the risks and the goals for the project. So once we've computed a handful of solutions, we're going to explore the compromises between them. If none of our solutions are viable, then we can select the one that's closest and go do a little exploration with what we call a risk gauge. A control panel is a really quick way of changing our estimate assumptions and seeing in 2 seconds what the impact is. Prioritize features sizing. If we can come up with the prioritized backlog, and most of our Agile folks are doing that, let's say, for example, one of the options or solutions you would pick would be to reduce scope by 25%. Well, is 75% functionality delivered enough to be valuable? Well, having this prioritized backlog, of course, will make that an easy decision for you. And the answer is probably yes, you could do that. Particularly if you know it in advance that that's your goal, and you've got 7 months to get yourself there. If you're doing more of a waterfall or hybrid approach, you may have to do kind of a wait and see. Okay. And then lastly, well, we can look at the PI calculator, and I'm going to show you that lets us say, well, I know a lot of you may not have a good feel for what that means, and I'm going to show you the relative difference between what's reasonable and what's not, and then let you kind of get a feel for whether you could take on a higher productivity or not. And then lastly, you can also tweak what life cycle parameters SLIM is modeling as well. You can adjust your staffing assumptions. You can put a little less effort in certain activities and see if that would help you as well. So lots of ways to kind of fine-tune your estimate and zero in on the best outcome. And then lastly, we want to compute some contingency for our solution such that we commit to something with a high level of success. And I'll show you how we do that in both tools as well. Contingency solutions are just, again, where we're adding some risk buffer, maybe some extra schedule or extra cost and effort, maybe a little bit of both. And we're going to add that to our recommended solution. This just tells you that the orange side is in SLIM Estimate. It just shows you that running a constrained solution with high target probabilities is how we would get there. And in SLIM collaborate, we actually have a special contingency dashboard, and I'm looking forward to showing that to you as well. So let me get out of these PowerPoint slides, and we'll come back to them at the end. And so this is, you're looking at SLIM estimate, and I've created an estimate, those two estimates that I mentioned. We've got what we call, in SLIM, you can log in multiple solutions, and you'll see that as we go along. So I've got the two that I mentioned. Here's what we call that, the one that's associated or remodeling those desired outcomes, the perhaps unrealistic expectations, and then our industry-based solution. What you're looking at here is a staffing profile. It is average staff per month over time, and it's showing you also the activities that we're going to be performing on the project, requirements and design and coding and testing and such. Now this is admittedly a waterfallish looking. We do of course work with several folks who are doing agile development, so we model agile projects as well. And so what you can see here, let me go down to a folder here. And so this is an example of some simple trend charts in SLIM estimate. We can see both of our solutions. This is the industry-based. It's going to take about 8.7 months, but our client wants it in 7. So these are our desired outcomes. I could click on either one of those and the information about the estimate populates over here. And we can tell right away, this is effort up here on the upper right. We've got it's on the y-axis. We've got our, this happens to be a medical records system, so it's a business application. So those are the trends that I'm using from QSM database. Our industry solution is sitting right on the average, and our desired outcomes is, proposing to use quite a bit less effort than would be typical. Now we said that maybe the productivity index was something we were going to focus in on. So if I make this bigger, we can see that this is, close to average. It's about 18.4 productivity index for this solution. And our desired outcomes is 20.4. And again, for those of you who don't have a feel for that, that's a pretty significant difference. But looking at the trend lines, this estimate, the desired outcome, is well within one standard deviation. So it actually may not be unrealistic. It's just a matter of, well, but is it unrealistic for you? Okay, so that's where some of that additional history would come into play. But still, it might be a little bit risky here. So in order to perform our analysis and maybe come up with some alternative solutions, I'm going to go ahead and right now I've got our desired outcome solution, what we call current. Okay, here's that 20.4 productivity index. I'm going to start my analysis with the industry or balanced risk solution, the one that's typical, because I want to start out assuming an average PI and then see what I can do from there. So what I'm going to do is go into what we call the solution assumption screen. This is where all of the inputs or assumptions about an estimate are in our tool. We've got some activities we're including. Here's a size estimate, which in this case, I just use a t-shirt size estimate of a medium small project from my trend line. There are obviously lots of different ways to size projects, and we at QSM would of course help you do that. Here's our assumption about productivity. And so I'm going to enter my constraints. Okay, I've got 7 months. That's going to limit me. And I could ask for some additional risk buffer here, but I actually in this example want to separate that out as the last step. So if I set this to 50%, that's what I really expect to happen. It's the highest single probability. So I'm just going to set it there because I don't want to ask for any buffer right now. And we wanted to limit our team to 8 people. So let me set that as well. Okay. And so just by setting a couple of constraints, I accept those, and then if I run a constrained solution, and Slim comes up and tells me, you're actually in that impossible zone. I can't get there from here. Would you like some help? And we'll say yes. And so it's told me it's calculated what it calls a balanced probability solution and 5 other solutions for me to look at. Great. That's a big help. I don't even have to go and do them, all at once. I could, but I don't have to if I can do it this quickly. Now, what's happened, you may have noticed that this little risk gauge was gray a while ago, and now that I've entered some constraints, it's been activated. So in these green areas, is my target zone for the confidence level I'd like to achieve. And of course, it's 50%, so it's a pretty wide range. But look how far off I am from even achieving that. If you hover over this, I've got less than a 10% chance of getting this done in the time that I would like to. So before we go look at the solutions that have already been presented, I love this risk gauge because it's dynamic. And so one of the ways that you can quickly and easily explore those alternatives is to say, well, I can't get it done in 7 months at this, capability or productivity level. What would it take? So I can grab the arrow and drag it over till it's green. And I love this because it lets you see visually. I mean, I wasn't kidding when I said literally to see that nonlinear trade-off in action. And if in order to bring the schedule in, it's going to take 34 people, nowhere near 8 people. So I think that's pretty impossible. So let's go look at the list of alternative solutions and see what we can come up with. So I've got those trend charts here, and I've got all my solutions on the trend chart. And the one I just ran is this crazy one up here. What Slim is going to do again is going to create these ones that say auto after them or have been generated for me. The balanced risk solution is going to do, it's going to try its best. That's the one we started with just a while ago. But you can see here for each of the metrics, you can see the impact of the different solutions to guide your analysis on which one to pick. So let's quickly look at these. These two are meeting each single constraint. This is saying, well, what if you did take on that higher productivity? Well, what if we reduce the scope? And this is from a 60,000 down to 38,000 generic size unit we call implementation units. That is a fairly big scope reduction. So what if we did a little bit of both? We didn't reduce quite as much scope, but we came up in productivity a little bit. Would that be defensible? Would you be okay with taking on that amount of risk? Okay, so those are the ones we can analyze. Let's go ahead and assume that maybe we want to take on a little bit of risk, and so we would like to start with this solution a little bit more productive and a little bit less scope as our jumping off point for doing some further analysis. Now, one thing we could do, first we'd like to know, going from, let's say around 18 PI to 19.1, does that make any sense? Or what would how could I justify that? So I mentioned the productivity index calculator in the slides. And again, it's over here, we can just come in and we can see that, because this size is slightly smaller and on our trend lines, PI goes up with size, the recommended productivity index or average, let's say, for this trend is even less than 18, would be a 17.3. Now, so we can adjust the productivity index in Slim. You may have legitimate reasons to, like I said, if you can defend it, then go ahead. So, but to help you see maybe what a 1 PI difference, what would have to happen on your project in order to achieve that, let's say. Well, you might have to say that your tools and methods, and again, we're kind of getting away from objectivity to subjectivity here, but let's say, we have great tools and methods. We're really on the top of our game. Then you could justify a 1 PI increase with that. You're not quite there yet. So you'd probably also have to assume that the technical complexity on this project is going to be low. And that gets you, that more than gets you there. And again, the question becomes, though, is this really the situation for your project? Can you justify those kinds of adjustments to productivity? Perhaps not. Okay. So assuming that, let me show you one more thing, and that would be just if this is our recommended solution and we're willing to take the risks, then I talked about a range of potential outcomes and contingency. This is an example of the risk charts that we have. Probability gives you the probability of the potential outcomes, and we've got schedule on the left-hand side and duration on the right. That 50% solution is the reason I did that. Is, that's our work plan. We're doing a Monte Carlo simulation with a normal distribution, and that is indeed what we expect to happen. It's the highest probability. But if I wanted to be 80% confident of not exceeding my schedule, well, we're only talking a half of a month here. So is that, so okay, let's do it. Can we negotiate for another half a month? Maybe so. Or go ahead and extend it back out to 8. Now some deadlines can't slip, so maybe it's impossible. Well, then we'd have to go look at the budget then. And our budget contingency here, our work plan is for about 800K, but if we were wanting to make sure we didn't exceed our budget, then we would want to propose maybe an 80% solution. That's kind of costly. It's an additional 300K in budget management reserve in this particular instance. And so lastly then, again, assuming that this is what we would recommend, our recommended solution, then lastly we could come in and we could actually just use our assessment here about what assurance level we need, and we could have all of the charts and reports update that information. So we can run the Contingency Wizard in Slim Estimate, and it just simply asks you, hey, how much assurance do you need on duration and effort? And I'll accept the 80%. That's a pretty comfortable range. I had a client ask me, well, what if I wanted 100% assurance of not exceeding my budget? And I said, well, then you're probably going to need more contingency than is realistic. And that's the kind of neat thing I'm going to show you in just a minute in Slim Collaborate. So we would just run this solution. Go back to, to see what it says. And so now we're going to commit to 7.5 months and about $1 million. Okay. Let me take about 5 minutes or so before we answer questions and just show you how all this works in Slim Collaborate. So this is our web-based tool, enterprise tool, and here we've got projects in a project list that are of various stages, like I mentioned, of the life cycle. And here's my same project. I've got my medical record system here. Let me just open that up. And I've already run those 2 solutions and those alternative solutions to save some time. But just to show you here, compared to the example trend chart I showed you earlier, the orange solution here is actually the industry solution, and the blue one is my desired outcomes. I flipped them in this case. And so we, you can see over here these radio buttons across the bottom that say constraints. This is what I would use to run those alternative solutions. If I go and this is a time series plot, we're looking at, of course, at cumulative effort. I can look at one of those trend charts here and see the difference and see that shaded region. I could double click on it and make it bigger. So the balanced risk, of course, is right on there. This solution number 1 is my desired outcomes. And it's, it's not crazy on duration. This is only for duration. Let me go to the estimation dashboard and I can show you how you can look at several trend charts all at once, just like we were doing in the other tool. I could come down. Now we have, you can create as many dashboards as you like, public and private, and each one can contain up to 9 different charts. So this one happens to be our sanity check. We've got the trend charts for each core metric. And notice those arrows that I was talking about. Most of them are conservative, except for the probability. So again, same situation we were talking about before. Here's that more reasonable industry solution, the 18.4, and here's this one's slightly higher here, but it's definitely in the red zone. So even though it's within one standard deviation, the way we've defined these ranges, it lets you know that you're working in maybe a territory that you shouldn't, taking on extra risk that maybe you don't want to. Here's an example of that risk chart that I showed. This lets you, again, zero in on where is the problem. And we can see the most red here on the productivity index. If I go to the compare alternative solutions view, I just wanted to show you this quickly to let you see that as with Slim Estimate, we could run and log several solutions and see the impact of them one relative to another. It's just a really quick way to zero in. So let me get out of here and go back to the project page, and I'm going to make I've already created that same recommended solution, and I want to make that my current solution because we're going to look. The neat thing about the contingency dashboard is the fact that we can come up with the best solution that we think is viable as a work plan and then add the contingency as a separate step. Those of you who are familiar with Slim Estimate and been using it for a while know that, you know, if I had to set those target probabilities at 80% or higher or some other value, then I would have been automatically getting a solution with the risk, with the assurances built in. But I actually like the fact that in Slim Collaborate, it's a separate step. So you get your best solution first, and then you come here. Now the same concept with the dashboard works here. You can have as many as you want. Notice that we didn't look at it in Slim Estimate, but notice that up here is where you would set your uncertainty rating around those key input assumptions, productivity, the size or the scope, and also the labor rate. And then you could look at the probability charts like I showed you in Slim Estimate as well here. I'd like to actually jump on down to this compare. I want to look at the trend view. So the neat thing here is the ability to see in this gray shaded area the impact of the amount of assurance that you're selecting. So we've got staffing curve over time, cost rate, and then cumulative effort and cost. And we can set up in Slim Collaborate different contingency profiles. This is something you can configure, totally up to you. The bottom three here that says 65, 80, or 95% probability, these are using that Monte Carlo simulation, and so we can see the impact of that contingency, or what is it buying for us. That helps us see, you know, how to gauge how much contingency we might want. Is that unreasonable all by itself? The other way of doing it actually doesn't involve the Monte Carlo at all, and it just lets you set a certain amount of buffer of effort and schedule, kind of tacking that on at the end. So when I select that one, you can see this profile is actually quite different, and our risk buffer is coming at the end in this particular case. These different profiles are a great way to promote consistent practices when it comes to your estimation process. That's the great thing about Slim Collaborate, is that it lets you set up a consistent, repeatable process and makes it simpler for folks, and you can just standardize on what you're doing. So that's all I wanted to show you in both of the tools. I hope it's been helpful. I know some of this is quite new to some of you. But again, if you have some questions, maybe Elizabeth could let me know, and I'm happy to answer them. Just to let you know, I know getting PMI PDUs is popular with folks, and we're glad to offer those. I set this up today, and so it may take a few hours for this to actually show up on the website, but this is the code for you to claim your 1 hour of PDU credit. So with that, I will say again, thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Laura. And I think everybody really appreciates your presentation and taking time to answer questions. I'll start with the first one we got, which was, would you recommend capping scope creep cost or prefer just to re-estimate project budget?
That's an interesting question. Well, it would depend on it depends on how much control you have over scope creep with your management in the first place. Now, if you're, let's say, if you're a solution integrator and this is something that you can propose, you don't have your internal management perhaps to battle with, then I would say, yeah, go ahead and compute for yourself. Again, it's so easy to compute the impact. Well, what would the cost be if it were an extra 15%, or what would the cost be if it's an extra 20% increase in scope? And you can gauge that. But if you have the ability to negotiate on that, then I definitely would.
And I know we've actually gotten a bunch of questions on how you calculate the productivity index. So if you could speak a little bit to that.
Sure. Well,
Great.
so that software production equation just has the 4 variables in it. So of course we needed to estimate size and have a unit of measure for scope. And I used a t-shirt size, but of course we recommend and we will help you come up with more detailed estimates, either based on simply a count of the number of requirements or features, capabilities, stories, user stories, story points, all of those. Once you have a size, then for completed projects, we're staying high level with the core metrics. So we have the development and test schedule, how long did we take in calendar time for that whole set of activities, and then the amount of effort applied. Those are the 3 knowns, right? So we just rearrange the equation and we calculate the productivity index, and it captures the efficiency of your entire development process. It includes those tools and methods and technical complexity and personnel and even management style, everything that you kind of have to deal with that affects the capability of the organization and the environment the project's in. Is that helpful?
I think that definitely helps. Next question is, does QSM help to input the customer data to ensure the data is going in correct and produces the appropriate output?
Oh, yes, absolutely. We would be more than happy to help you with that. We have training on Slim Data Managers, the product that we use for that, and support is included with your license. And so absolutely, we will make sure that, and it's not a lot of data. People have the idea that it's a lot of data, but since we're staying high level, typically what we need to do is take probably the lower level, maybe task level information you have on effort and schedule, and we will help you map those activities to the phases in Slim. And so yes, absolutely. And you can actually capture custom metrics as well to help you identify maybe different aspects about projects. So once you have them in your database, you can identify only those that are relevant to the estimate you're getting ready to perform, in order as to, a selective basis of estimate, if you will. So yeah, we'll definitely help you with that.
Is there an integration to Microsoft Project Online or MS Dynamics 365?
Not online at the time. We do integrations. Our Slim Suite has an API, and we integrate right now with the PPM tool, CAPPM. I think they're going back to the name Clarity, but and that's a two-way back and forth for the estimate portions. But we do have an API for. Let's see, so you asked about Microsoft Project Online. So that would be like the PPM tool. But we have our Collaborate can integrate with CAPPM as well. And we always have half of an integration built right now. And so we can talk with you about how to extend that to the products that fit your organization.
Can we use the master plan quadrant bubble chart to analyze an estimate solution from Slim Estimate?
Yes, that's exactly what you're bringing into Slim Master Plan. So each bubble would be either a release, maybe sometimes we do releases in cadence. So it might be a 4-month, 3-month, 6-month release cycle. That might be what you've brought in from Slim Estimate, or, and again, it could be from Slim Control, the tracking tool as well. One thing we're working on in our next release of Slim Estimate is providing the quadrant charts in Slim Estimate as well. That's not available yet.
With PI, should I have to factor in that software developers can code only for 6 out of 8 hours per day, or does personnel cover that?
So that's a setting within the tool. So when you tell it how much each person is working, so when we say staffing in Slim, across all of the tools, we mean a full-time equivalent. So that would you would specify that actually in your definition of how many hours a day does a full-time equivalent person work. And then given that setting and your total hours for the project, then the productivity index would scale itself appropriately.
How do you know which industry data to use?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, so QSM's industry data is the whole thing is over 13,000 projects, but it's grouped by application type. And what I mean by that is, what is the product itself? What kind of product is it? Or what type of work is being done? So we have 17 trend groups that range from real time and microcode to IT and business applications. And within the business group, it's broken down further by development methodology like Agile, or an industry such as finance or government. So those are the number of trends that we have. If it's a business application, that'll be pretty straightforward. But we can help you, and we'll also, if you think you'd like to see if there's a special kind of project we have information on our database, we'll be happy to take a look and see.
Okay, I think we probably have time for about 1 or 2 more questions. But once again, if there's any additional questions, you can feel free to ask them, and I will keep track of them all and refer them to Laura if we don't get to them. Or you can also email us at info@QSM after the presentation if you have any questions. So, can you define your own contingency amounts?
In Slim Estimate, you're going to get a probability profile, the chart that I showed, and those are going to be at increments of about 5%. So you could type in there, I just took the defaults in that Contingency Wizard at Slim Estimate. I took the default of 80%, but I could have entered any number like 65, 60, 75, etc. The contingency profiles that you define in Slim Collaborate, yes, absolutely. Be on a kind of a percentage basis, whether you're doing the target probability or the fixed percentage amount. But yes, those are completely customizable.
Well, thank you, Laura. This has been a great presentation, and we've had some really great questions from our audience. Once again, if anybody has additional questions, feel free to follow up with us. We're happy to answer them for you. And we will also, I know we've had a lot of questions about the replay and the slides. Those will all be available next week. We'll send an email with a link to those. So you'll all be able to access those if you missed anything or if you want to share this with any colleagues. So thank you for attending, and stay tuned. We'll have future webinars and articles and papers. So thank you all for joining us today, and thank you, Laura.
Thank you.